All right, good morning. My name is Dorian Gatchell. I work as an agronomy consultant out of western Minnesota. Granite Falls is my home. I grew up there on a family farm about where Yellow Medicine, Renville, Chippewa County meet, right alongside the Minnesota River. So when I was talking about water issues this morning, I've seen changes out of that river since I was this high to conditions in that river this year that I've never seen before. So it's maybe take it a little bit personally, but again, I work as a consultant. I work with clients all over the spectrum of crop production. Guys that are doing the same thing that you guys are trying to do. I've got some customers that have the biggest piece of iron you've ever seen. Every single one of them pay me to do the same thing, is to help them to be able to do the best that they're doing within their operation. So yes, I do talk to all of them in some form or fashion about cover crops, about tillage, about all those things, but I got to do it in a little bit different way. I don't necessarily go to the guys that love to do a lot of tillage and say that, hey, if you plant a cover crop, you're going to have less wind-blown soil and it's going to not end up in the ditch. What I do tell them, though, if you plant a cover crop, you get other agronomic benefits. And that's, like I say, that's what they pay me for. A lot of those things that you guys are doing are actually the better agronomic practices. I let them make their own decision that, hey, if I do this, it's a good idea. I don't think I've ever convinced anybody to make any changes. At least I hope I haven't, because when it goes wrong, then it's my fault. My goal is to give everybody the information that they need to be able to make those decisions. And I find that's been a very effective way to be able to get people to transition from doing things in a more conventional way to more of a conservation-minded way. But I do want to make sure that we're all on the same wavelength. Again, because I work with a lot of growers across the whole spectrum of crop production, what is a definition of conservation or soil health or tillage or whatnot? I think Mark had something this morning. I mean, what do you consider that? Oh yeah, and that wasn't a rhetorical question. Somebody got an idea? What is a definition of, let's say, soil health? Soil that's in balance. I don't know if there is a right answer. I guess the way I look at it is that if a grower is doing something within their means to minimize their impact, they are doing something in a soil health manner or in a conservation manner. The reason I say that is because not everybody has the means to be able to do everything. A grower that rents out his land, his landlord will not let him apply a cover crop. How does he do soil health practices? Well, if he can just reduce a tillage pass, in my mind, he's doing something a little bit better. Smaller growers, some of this equipment is very expensive. They can't necessarily afford it. So as long as everybody's doing something within their means, within their resources, I think it's a step up. So I just don't want to get caught in a definition and be talking, basically in a different language than everybody else. And something else that I always bring up to whenever I'm talking to a group, and this is probably the most important thing that I will say today, and that is, hey, we're all in this for a reason. We got to make some money. We got to pay bills, and it always comes down to yield. So I'm going to ask this question: what is it that makes yield? Okay, well, yeah, but I mean, what is allowing you to gain those bushels per acre?
The right seed at the right time.
Right seed at the right time. I'm sorry? Photosynthesis. A lot of times there's always a seed guy in the group, and he's always telling me it's the seed selection, it's the traits. You got to have that. Fertility. A lot of people talk about fertility. Well, yeah, if you don't have fertility, you're not making yield. Seeding depth. Absolutely, every one of us has put seed on top of the ground accidentally because you didn't push the handle down to put the planter in the ground, or is that just me? Okay, just me. Singulation, the technology, guys, it's all about singulation. That's what makes yield. Rain. We had plenty of rain this year, or lack of rain, I guess, depending on where you're at. But can we all at least agree that these things are all the environment that the seed lives in? The best answer I think I've ever gotten to this question was talking to a group like you guys, and it come down to reducing plant stress. And I think that is true. It is what is making your yield is reducing the stress on your plant. But what you got to remember is that whenever you're doing something in a field, what is going to make your yield is how your plant's genetics are going to interact within its environment. If you want to look at it in some sort of mathematical formula, there it is. Your yield is a function of how your plant's genetics will interact with its environment. Now, you don't have much you can do to select your genetics. Sure, you can get one variety versus another one, but the genetics are there. Honestly, you can't do much about your environment. It's going to rain. It's not going to rain. Sure, you can put down fertility or too much, too little, but realistically, all you can do is give that plant, give those genetics the best opportunity to interact within its environment. And like I say, I think a lot of people really kind of lose that concept, is that it is such a dynamic scenario that you got to be thinking, if you're in the field, are you there because of what you need to do, or are you there because of what your plant needs? And there's too many in industry, especially when I tell somebody that, hey, you need to apply your herbicide today, and it's Friday, and it says, nah, we got to go to the lake this weekend. I'll spray it on Monday. No, Monday's too late. That happens way too often. Tillage, a lot of people will do tillage. This field is going to get tilled today. Maybe it's not ready, but it's going to get tilled today. It's going to get planted today. Most of the time, farmers are in the field for their own benefit, not for their plant's benefit or not for their seed's benefit. So I think this is probably one of the most important concepts that we can be thinking about when going through all this. I got way too many slides, so I'm going to kind of talk fast. You're going to keep me on track? Okay. My bias, I am a fan of strip till. I think everybody needs to write out a check, go get a strip till machine, and start that this fall. If anybody does anything, that's what you need to do. I know it's not practical, but a lot of what you're going to hear me say is actually going to be kind of around that, because I do like the concept of strip till. In this presentation, I kind of adapted from a presentation I did to the Board and Water Soil Resources a few years ago about tillage. And I think this is something else that we all need to be thinking about, is why do we till? Anybody know why?
Because my daddy.
Yes. I think I got that up here somewhere. There's too many retired fathers, there's too many retired fathers-in-law. I seen on social media somewhere that somebody had commented that we need to have a retired farmer daycare somewhere. But I think there's a lot of that. But honestly, it's it's because of Jethro Tull. Everybody knows Jethro Tull, right? The 80s European band. This crowd is not that young. You guys know this. Okay. Yeah, it's actually this Jethro Tull. And in looking at this, the band, I understand, did name themselves after the agriculturalist. So I got a new favorite band, I guess, if they're going to name themselves after somebody. Jethro Tull was a European, British agronomist back in the day. He's the one that kind of had come up with the philosophy of your plants take up the soil. And that's why you have to till it so much, because the first 3 or 4 passes of tillage, it breaks that soil down so much that it allows it to the plant to take it up. And he was probably fairly accurate when you think about it. But you know, when you finish tilling, the plants stop growing. So obviously it's the tillage that was causing the plants to grow. And ever since then, all our technology has been around tillage. Realistically, it has. I mean, there was no other technology to do anything other than to till the ground, to control weeds, to dry it out, to do all those other things. So if you want somebody to blame, there he is. In a conventional sense, there was so much tillage, or the reason tillage was done was basically to prepare it for planting. I said you got to till the soil to dry it out. Now this is a concept that many people get into is, yes, you got to dry it, or you got to till it to dry it out so that your planter can run through it. In a big way, that is true. You need to desiccate out that top couple of inches so your planter can go over it and you don't have all the soil sticking to it. And that is very important. And why is it? Well, I'm going to go through these fast because you guys know. You kill weeds, you make a seed bed, bury residue, many planters. People that are converting from conventional tillage going into strip till, no till, or it's even reducing tillage, their biggest drawback that I see is their planter. Their planters were designed to go through a black soil. So when they reduce their tillage, then they go in the next year and try to plant and they fail. Well, I reduced my tillage, it didn't work. Well, as he had said earlier, it's a system. You change one thing, you got to adapt many other things. And this is one of the problems I see with a lot of guys is that they didn't have the planter or the attachments or the setup on their planters to be able to deal with any residue. Creating a seed bed, controlling weeds, incorporating inputs, residue, too many retired fathers, father-in-law. That is a lot of it. Even my father-in-law, I'll get in the tractor at 9 o'clock and I'm done at 2 because he can. And he wants to get out of the house. There is a lot of that. Landlords. I do know a lot of landlords that they tell their renter, yes, it needs to be black at the end of the year. Unfortunately, wide adoption, a lot of these practices, you got to figure out a way to talk to well, maybe I shouldn't say that. I somewhat can get myself in trouble when I tell guys that, hey, sooner or later your landlords are going to start saying that in contracts that you got to start leaving residue. You got to start doing no-till or reducing till. It's going to come. The effects of tillage. The good, weed control again. Loosening compacted soil, well, I kind of wonder if we have as much compaction as what everybody wants to say. And I got some slides in here to explain that. Dries and warms for planting, and it makes the field more uniform for planting. My grandfather was probably the first guy that I knew that did any precision agriculture, back in the day. And the reason is on his home quarter, the northwest 10 acres, maybe only got corn once every 5 years. The other field, maybe, he had small fields. And the reason, because this whole quarter would never be in condition to plant all at the same time, or it wouldn't be in condition to be able to do what he wanted to do. Now that's not the case. Tree lines are coming out, groves are coming out, fields are getting bigger. This field is going to get treated today because I'm here. And that whole field isn't always going to be ready. Some of the bad things that happen is you're going to destroy structure, reduce organic matter, weed control. This is one that I really like talking to some guys too about, is that you want more weeds, go till your soil. Tillage plants weeds. And I think I got a slide in here to show that. And obviously it leaves it open for erosion. So that's kind of the bad stuff. It's why you guys don't do that anymore, or at least you really have reduced your impact with tillage on the soil. And I think maybe that last one is one of the big reasons why a lot of people have done that. So, okay. Is what Mark wanted me to go over is some of these soil health indicators that are looked at when trying to assess the soil and trying to determine, okay, is it a healthy field? Is it somewhere in between? Is it very degraded? I've got the ones that I will look at, or I guess I've listed the things that I would look at. There are probably many other things that a person can look at, but these are probably the major ones that you want to be paying attention to. And the first one is water infiltration. We're getting less snowfall. We're getting warmer nights in the winter. Our rainfall is coming. God, as a kid, I think I want to remember that, hey, we'd get a 3/4 inch rain. It would come over 3 days. It was one of those type of rainfalls where you could be outside all day long and not get wet. it doesn't happen anymore. We don't get 3/4 inch rainfalls anymore. We get 2 inches, we get 3 inches, we get 4 inches. Would you say you had 9 inches this summer?
Yeah, just, we're 9.5 inches short, and about a couple days we got that.
Yeah, it's just unreal on how fast it is coming now. So water infiltration is definitely one of those things that is going to make a big improvement on whether or not you have some, a healthy soil. And if this will play, there we go. I love the technology. This is a video that I put together on a field that had some cover. The grower here was a minimalist. He didn't do a lot of tillage. He does some strip till, and he does some minimum till on his soybeans, and then on a tilled field. This was only one dump of water in a 1-inch rainfall event. In actuality, the cover, before it started ponding, we immediately put in 3 inches of rain, equivalent of rain, and it soaked it in. I think we got 2 in the crop. And at 10 minutes, I cut off. I got bored of recording water that would not infiltrate on a fully tilled soil. All these locations would fit, well, they were only meters apart from each other within the same soil. So it definitely was not just because it was a different soil, it was the management that caused that difference in infiltration. Now, some will argue that, hey, if you're getting the water going through the field that quick, where's your nutrients going? Philosophical question, but hey, if you've got dissolved nitrogen in that water, guess where it's going? Well, it's going down. Is it going down too far? Maybe. Is the crop going to get it back? Maybe. There's a reaction for everything. But anyway, it's definitely one of those conditions where if you're able to at least keep the soil from moving off. In western Minnesota, we have way more particulate sulfur than dissolved phosphorus. I'm guessing in this part of the state, you're probably more worried about dissolved phosphorus. Is that the case? Anybody know over here? But wind-blown sulfur again. Wind-blown phosphorus is a big issue for us in western Minnesota, more so than dissolved phosphorus. So keeping our water on the landscape is a big deal. No, I ain't going to mention that. Compaction or bulk density. Can somebody tell me what the proper bulk density is supposed to be? And I'm asking because I don't know. I don't know if there is a proper number. I guess whenever I'm taking a penetrometer and putting it in the ground, what am I looking for? I'm just looking to see if there's a restriction zone in there somewhere. Generally, in any field that's had any history of tillage, you can find a restriction zone. Some will call it a compaction layer, call it what you want, but a restriction zone. But again, when I ask about what is the proper PSI to have, I'm not sure I know it. I don't know if anybody's been able to really tell me. As long as it is not adversely restricting plant growth or water infiltration, maybe having a restriction zone helps in some other way. It's when that restriction zone becomes impermeable and obstructs roots from going down, restricts water from going down. The best way you're going to get rid of that is through tillage, is through a root. A lot of people, and I really am surprised on how often this is done, and maybe you see it down here too, is that in the fall people will not till their soil, but they'll go around and till up their headlands. They're breaking up that compaction. All they're doing is loosening up the soil, so the next time they drive on it, they just compact it more. But again, I question how much true compaction we actually do have, simply because of all the tillage that we do. You guys heard of fluffy soil syndrome? It is an actual syndrome, whereas all the history of tillage has fluffed up that soil so much that it's really taken out the bulk density, and there is just nothing there for the roots to hold on to. And that's continuously being done. But yeah, it is like I say, it is a syndrome. I gotta remember where these are at. But anyway, said there's a pointer on here. Anyway, in a soil pit, we were able to find what was a pretty restrictive zone right in through there. Oh yeah, that's right. This was actually in a field that had been under a tillage for many years, went into about 15 years of minimum till and about 4 years worth of vertical till. In 4 years, we were able to find a vertical till pan. So just by doing vertical till isn't necessarily the answer either, because you can still create a restriction zone just with vertical till. It's all about keeping roots down in there too, because this was just a reduction in tillage. This was not an incorporation of cover crops in here. So it was possible to find that, and that knife, same one, we found at about 4 inches, that zone. Tire tracks, again, in a field that was under a minimum till. We still found the tire tracks, absent of cover crops. That tire track, and you can see the lateral fracturing of the soil in there, it's going to stay there for a long time. It's going to take a while for that to come out. But fortunately, this grower was on a he always drove in the same path. So when he was making tire tracks, at least it was only in one part of the field. Obviously hit a restriction zone. But when dealing with PSI, looking at a penetrometer, did that affect that plant? I don't know. Probably not. So it still all comes down to whether or not that restriction zone is inhibiting either water movement going down or root penetration. Now on a dry year, would that restriction zone have been a little bit better? Excess water would stay towards the surface? I don't know. But just because the plants are resilient, just because it had something that it had to go around, maybe it was a pebble or a stone. I don't know if it was actually the plow pan or not that would cause that. But, you know, something to be thinking about is that, was that really detrimental? Another thing that we always want to look at is earthworms. This is something everybody talks about all the time. What do earthworms do for you? Oh yeah, look at that. Other critters down there too. These are rodent burrows. I just thought they were neat. But some earthworms that had found, there's a root channel, or a root that had went down into an earthworm channel, some worm castings. Earthworms can churn a lot of soil in a year. I forget the actual numbers, but I mean, they can turn over a lot of soil. You know, and they absolutely love seeds. You guys ever seen the video of the earthworms coming up taking giant ragweed seeds down? Go to YouTube and just search for earthworms and giant ragweed or something like that. It come from somebody that was doing a study on giant ragweed. So what do? You put the giant ragweed seed out there to do whatever study you want to do, and they couldn't get them to grow. So they finally put a camera out there to find out what's going on. It turns up the worms were coming up, grabbing the giant ragweed and taking them down. It's really neat. A lot of neat things on YouTube. And these channels are great for water. You know, they're great for roots. Earthworms are good. This spring, when I was doing some assessments on a few of the fields, we had a dry spring, and 3 of the 4 fields had some tillage done on it. Very few earthworms. I go to the next field that had been left with some residue. Still dry, but yet that residue was enough to entice the worms to come up and at least be more numerous in the soil. So it's going to be very interesting on these same fields this fall to see what it's like being dry and not having any major tillage on these fields, just to see what the difference is. But a very, very good way to assess whether or not your field or your soil is progressing through some soil health is by the presence of earthworms, and not just earthworms. I mean, look at all the other microflora that could be out there. Like I say, there was some gophers, you got spiders, you got beetles. You know, if you start seeing all those out in the field, somebody had shown me a picture one time. It was an alfalfa field with a tremendous amount of spider webs in it. A very good indication of soil health because, hey, spiders are the predators. You have very few predators on top of the food chain, a lot more prey on the bottom of the food chain. So on a field that had a lot more spiders in it meant it had a lot more prey items in it. Another very good indicator of whether or not that field was more healthy is just simply by the presence of the spiders. Okay, I like this one, microorganisms. Another thing to assess when you're looking at soil health. This is hard to assess. How do you assess your microorganisms and how do you assess the quantity versus the quality? My interest lied when I was going through school was in soybean cyst nematode. I got fields that were tens of thousands, close to 100,000 soybean cyst nematode. Lots of microorganisms, so that's a good thing, right? Well, the reason that there was that many was because all the other stuff was gone. So when looking at the microorganisms, you definitely want to have a diverse colony of those out there as well. And the bacteria versus fungi. How many of you have been reducing your tillage and finding out your residue breaks down a lot faster? You know why? It's because of that. Fungi are way, way more efficient at breaking down residue than bacteria are. About 3 times more efficient. Thing is, in a field that is heavily tilled, the fungi don't like it there. They don't live there very well. They have a higher potential of bacterial microorganisms, less fungi. You stop tilling or you reduce your tillage, you can induce more fungi. Fungi don't like being buried. The bacteria can live underground. So that's basically why, is because when you have that more rapid breakdown is if you got more fungi. Again, how do you assess that? Maybe by how fast your residue will break down. Can you do some testing for it? Yeah, certainly, but it's time consuming and probably pretty expensive. But again, why do you have the microorganisms that you do? And it's because of your management. Fields that are heavily tilled, like I say, have a higher level of should have a higher level of bacterial microorganisms because that's the environment that they can live in. The fungi can't live in that. Same reason why you got the weeds that you do, and the same reason you got everything else that's going on, because nature has adapted to those management practices. And you definitely got to look at the pathogenic versus the good microorganisms. The Red River Valley, in the last few years, again going back to the soybean cyst nematode, Red River Valley has just been starting to get infested. And when they get it, the numbers just go through the roof. Hundreds of thousands per cc of soil, or 100 cc's of soil. But we don't have that down here where the soybean cyst nematode has been around for a lot longer. Well, why is that? Well, when those moved into the Red River Valley, there was a niche there that was not filled. They filled it. Eventually those numbers will come down because of all the other bugs that are in, well, I'm going to use bugs as a generic term, because all of those other microorganisms are in the soil and they finally found that equilibrium. And that's what's happened here, like in southern Minnesota, where, what has it been, mid-80s when they were first diagnosed here. So when those nematodes moved in, they filled a void that was not filled by anything else. If you have high counts of any other pathogenic microorganism, what's the best way to get rid of it? Spray a fungicide, spray a bactericide, do something like that. The best thing to do is to get other microorganisms in there to fill those voids where those high levels of pathogenic ones are, and it moves them out. You'll never get rid of them, but you can at least keep them at a level that is going to be more manageable and less detrimental to the crop. I mean, that makes sense? This is the one that everybody likes to do, is assess your soil by sight, feel, and smell. You always hear that the earth should smell earthy. Describe that to me, I don't know. I think everybody just kind of intuitively knows that if you take a handful of soil and you smell it, you can tell if it smells good or if it smells bad. Wetter soil will be a little sour. You can maybe have an ammonia smell in it. That's the denitrification that's happening when the soil goes anaerobic and the microbes are taking nitrogen out of the oxygen out of the soil and releases nitrogen gas. Again, a very subjective, but hey, I think everybody can instinctively do that. And by feel, the crumble. How many of you like to go into your field, you grab some of the soil and it smears all over your hand? Chances are you can go out into some of these, you can grab a whole handful of dirt and play with it, and your hands aren't going to be dirty when you're done. You go down the road, you do the same thing, you're going to have dirty hands. Again, something that's quite intuitive and very pronounced. I mean, it is something that is very, very noticeable. And just by look. If you drive around, you can see the eroded knobs. They're lighter color. The darker color you have, the more organic matter you're going to have in it, the more water holding capacity you're going to have, the better CEC you're going to have, everything else. Again, something that's very subjective, but something that I think intuitively everybody can deal with. But the one thing, if anybody is going to manage anything in the soil, the one thing that you need to be managing is your soil structure. And going back to one of my original slides, is that if you're doing anything in the field and you are doing it for the benefit of soil structure, you don't have to manage earthworms, you don't have to manage microorganisms, you don't have to manage smell, you don't have to manage any of those others. Why? Because if you build a soil structure, all those others are going to come. You build a birdhouse, you're going to get birds in it. You go through a pile of straw out on the yard, you're going to get beetles in it. You build soil structure, everything else is going to come. Soil structure is going to allow drainage. It's going to let earthworms live. Rootworm beetles. Rootworms being a problem down here this year, last couple years. Maybe. 2018, 2019, we had some very, very wet springs. And we also had very little rootworm problems. Why is that? In the spring, when the rootworms were the worm phase of their life cycle, they were in the soil. They were in a soil that was saturated, a soil that didn't have any airspace. They couldn't move around. They basically drowned. You take a soil then that has better structure, it has more area for the earthworms to move. Why do they come to the surface? Whenever it rains, you always see them out on the driveway. They're coming up for air? No, they're coming up looking for a date. They can't do that when it's saturated. They need the air in there. Microorganisms. Same thing. You got to have room for microorganisms to grow. If you're doing tillage, you're not managing soil structure. If you're not managing the soil structure, you're encouraging bacterial growth, not fungal growth. Why is the tropics got more diversity in species than the woods of northern Minnesota? It's a more stable climate. You can have an insect in the tropics that will specialize on feeding on one plant because similar hours of day and night, temperature is quite constant. There's always plenty of food. Look at northern Minnesota. In the wintertime, it goes cold. If you're an insect and you specialize on one plant, you're probably not going to live. The environment changes a lot rapidly. Now look at your field. If you harvest your crop, now if you leave it bare, now you've got nothing in there for the microorganisms or even the macroorganisms to live on. If you keep your environment within the field more stable, with better soil structure and everything else, all these things will come. It'll take time, but it'll come. But I think that's a good analogy, is the fact that, hey, there is a reason why, in warmer climates, especially in the tropics, that they can sustain a lot more species biodiversity, and it's because of that stable environment. And that's what you guys are doing by reducing your tillage, putting in the cover crop and whatnot. Again, if you're doing something in the field and it's not to the benefit of your plant, not to the benefit of soil structure, then what you are doing is probably detrimental to either the soil or to the crop. Is there anything else that we should look at when looking at soil health? I think these are the top indicators. There are probably some others, but anybody else look at anything else? I mean, you could think about, hey, resilience, being able to keep your tractor when you're harvesting, or the combine when you're harvesting, on top of the ground instead of making ruts. Sure, that's all about soil structure, you know. But again, I think like I say, I don't know if everybody's hungry, evidently. Yeah.
Have you ever ran a soil respiration test or a PLFA, phospholipid fatty acid test?
They've been taken. I know NRCS had encouraged those for quite a few years through their programs. What I really want to do is run I forget what the acronym is, but it's the Mr. Gem, the box that will cover the ground and basically capture all the respiration that comes through it. Lots of things to learn about those yet.
The infiltration ring that you had up there was actually designed to do that. Back in the 90s, you drove that in the ground, you put your plastic down with water over it, then you put plastic over that again, you pulled it away. It respirated the CO2 gas out, you pulled it out with a hypodermic needle and stuck it in a deal and pulled down enough respiration you had.
Yeah, one of the problems with that is being able to differentiate having pathogenic respiration versus good microorganisms. And that's one of the things that's got to be calibrated through, like the PFLA or the CO2 burst or whatnot. But it's going to come. Like I say, those things are a lot more trying to be very specific on measuring. But again, just looking at residue breakdown is a really good way to determine. Just looking at, I mean, you can see fungi on the soil or on the residue. It's a lot harder to see bacteria, but.
So with that comment, what do you think about all these farmers that are spraying every acre of corn and soybeans with a fungicide?
That is one of the things I probably. I see as a consultant, I see very little benefit to that. Are there specific needs? Yes, there can be. I've had people in industry tell me that, hey, we've got bad Goss's wilt this year, we better spray a fungicide. Goss's wilt is bacterial. A fungicide is not going to affect it. I think we can see a lot of detrimental effects long term with that. I'm speculating. I don't know if anybody's actually looked into it. There is a lot of observational evidence this year that especially in western Minnesota fields, soybean fields that got hit with a fungicide had higher incidence of spider mites. Spider mites are controlled by a fungus and in the dry weather. So unless there is a specific need for it, it's not something I encourage. And I think long term that might be somewhat detrimental.
My question for training as far as to the soil health, are you spraying fungicide on your crop, or you're killing the fungicide that are beneficial in your soil?
Yes, they are non-selective. Yes. Again.
There's a tremendous amount of data out that shows on our 5 soil care principles. Minimum disturbance is one of them, and everybody thinks that's minimum disturbance of your soil particles. But there's 3 ways to disturb your soils, and that's not about the physical side. That's tillage or no tillage. That's the
Biological side.
But there's a chemical side, and that's applying fertilities to your soil disrupts the carbon flow to your soils. And the third way of doing it is biological. And if you put any kind of a side out there, it shows if you put one out there, you'll knock your soil biology down drastically for 2 to 3 weeks. If you apply a second one, you'll knock it down for up to 6 weeks. If you apply the second one, the second application of the same side, you knock it back for more than 6 weeks at a time. So yes, it's very, very detrimental to it, but you don't ever hear that because big ag can't tell you that.
A lot of salesmanship goes into a lot of those applications.
There's a tremendous amount of data that's been out there. A lot of it's been done overseas in Australia and France and places like that.
And then look at this year, tremendously dry. To be able to get these organisms to grow, you need the host, you need the right weather, and you need the inoculum. We did not have a lot of fungal growth in crops this year, just simply because it was so dry. So yes, honestly, I think all of the fungicide that was sprayed was probably a nut. I'm not so sure it really did much of anything, and potentially was detrimental. Professionally, yes, I am not a fan of just prophylactic applications of fungicide. Yeah.
But do you think that cover crops in temporary situations probably help protect the good fungi in the soil?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's all again about thinking of the tropics. If you have the environment for those to be able to survive, they should be surviving a lot better. Even in a dry year. I mean, just think about, again, when I was out this spring taking those soil samples, it was a dry, everybody else, I wasn't finding any worms. I go into the one field that was not tilled, I pull back the residue and oh my God, there's all kinds of worms. Yes, it makes a difference. I think I am seeing in strip till fields better corn production versus those that have been tilled. Maybe it's because I want to see it, because I am a fan of strip till. But I think there are reasons why I may be seeing that. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. By having those cover crops in there, you can harbor some of those. How many of our problems that we have are because we are managing corn and soybean rotation is not a corn soybean rotation. It is a corn soybean monocrop. The weeds that we have, the diseases we have, everything else, they've adapted to that corn and soybean rotation monocrop. So livestock people that can put in some alfalfa once in a while, there is a little bit, at least in western Minnesota, some small grain. It all helps. But again, just having that, like I say, managing one thing, soil structure. If you're in the field, are you doing it for your benefit? Are you doing it for the soil's benefit or to your crop's benefit? And if all you're doing is thinking about soil structure, all of these other things are going to come. Okay. Time is it? Okay. The rest of the slides that I have in here are just going to relate back to these indicators that I just mentioned. Will tillage plant weeds? Absolutely. Here's a strip till field with lamb's quarter coming in all those strips. Every one of you have seen this. Having rye on a soybean field, having less weed pressure, definitely. This is something that I always found pretty disturbing. This was a number of years ago. This was in Yellow Medicine County. Look at the bottom of that telephone pole. It was sandblasted. Was the management being done on this field for the benefit of the crop, or was it to the benefit of the farmer? This is one of those stories where the landlord says, you will do this. And that was the result. That corn plant, how do you think that corn plant liked it? It was probably about that tall. I don't remember exactly. But you know what was really interesting about this? This picture was 5 years later. I tried to get into the same spot, but again, it's one of those struggles that I see a lot of people dealing with is that, hey, they want to do things right, they want to make changes, but they can't always do it. And that's why when I was mentioning at first is that, hey, being able to do things within the abilities of what you have is I just don't want anybody not to make any changes just simply, well, if I can't do this, I'm not doing any good. There's all kinds of small steps people can do to do good. And Then I come by and the next day, and then there's the county out there with a payloader cleaning it out of the ditch. I'm sure I will go back and I will get another picture of that same telephone pole sometime in the future with the same. What happened here? Fall of 2017. You can see those tire tracks, they're not even with the row. These are primary tillage. I don't know, I got a theory as to what happened. But again, coming down to fluffy soil syndrome, those tire tracks gave it just enough bulk density. I'm not going to use compaction. Compaction is a negative soil connotation. Gave it just enough bulk density for the plants that are in those wheel tracks to survive. The rest of the field just died prematurely. I would love to have been able to figure out a way to measure this. I see this every fall. The farmer is in here doing things for his own purpose, not for the purpose of his crop, not for the purpose of the soil. Do you guys deal with IDC out here? Maybe a little too far east. Iron deficiency chlorosis? Okay. Every year, guys are telling me my IDC is getting worse. My IDC is getting worse. They're trying to find the right soybean to put into it. They're using the iron products. I can solve IDC quite easily. Stop tilling. IDC is exacerbated by tillage. I see that a lot. You'll never get rid of those soil conditions that promote it, but you can certainly keep them from manifesting. And this picture is just showing that. Two different tillage types on the same soybean. You can see one is narrow rows, one is wide rows. Narrow rows should have better at IDC. The wide rows should be worse at IDC. So maybe maybe that evens itself out, but just by reducing the tillage, the incidence of IDC is a lot better. Was the guy out here doing things for his own benefit? Was he out here doing things for the benefit of his crop to his soil? I just left this in here because I think it's interesting. Weeds growing in a funny pattern. Anybody know why this happened? This happened to be somebody who had planted his beans, sprayed a product containing sulfentrazone. I think it was Sonic. And then come by with a Flexicoil. Every time those tines hit the soil, it flung a little bit of dirt away, and that treated soil was moved and let the weeds come through. I just thought it was interesting. Anybody on strip till has probably had this happen. This guy, this was his first year of strip till, and the next spring we got a lot of rain, it washed out. So it does take some time. He's trying to do the right thing. He hasn't had this happen since. This was about 5 years ago. So it's just one of those things to keep in mind that, hey, when you are transitioning, it does take some time to get these benefits built into the soil. It's not something that happens overnight. Again, so when we're talking about landlords, and the landlord saying, well, yeah, you can do these things, but why are you going to do it if you're on a one-year contract and you don't know if you're getting the benefit next year? No. I don't know why that's in there. I wanted to go over these. These I thought were really neat. Remember last year when Iowa got hit with that windstorm? The week before that happened, around home in Granite, we had a windstorm that come through, much smaller scale. It was only about 5, 6, 7 miles wide, maybe 20 miles long. 100-mile-an-hour winds were clocked. The interesting side story to this is when this storm come through, my dad, my nephew, and I were working in the shop. My son was in the house holding the cat, and we had a tree get struck by lightning that's maybe the width of this building away from the house. Do not hold your cat when lightning strikes that close to the house. I wish I had pictures. But anyway, after that storm come through, started seeing a lot of interesting patterns in the fields. And okay, what's going on here? You can see the straight lines. The corn is standing in the wheel tracks, both in the planter tracks and in the primary tillage tracks. You know, why is that? Same thing here. It may be harder to see, but the reason I put this one in there is you can see the planter tracks going that way, you can see tillage tracks going that way, and you can see tillage tracks going that way. There's 3 sets of tracks in this one. This is another case of the floppy soil, floppy soil syndrome, or the wheel tracks had bulk density. They stood. Everything else went down in that windstorm. I put one of these pictures on social media and I got eviscerated. Absolutely got my butt chewed, is because the best corn always goes down. The worst corn is the stuff that stands. It was horrendous, the amount of blowback I got from posting these on there. The same thing when you look at this. This is a strip till field, non-strip tilled. 100-mile-an-hour winds. It doesn't even look like it had been affected. Maybe a little better picture of a different field. The same thing. The strip till didn't even look like it had been affected. What I think is so profound about these pictures is the fact, and I think a lot of people in industry, not necessarily growers, but I think a lot of people in industry really lose track of what's going on. In all these instances, all these pictures I showed you, did the soybeans fail? Did this corn fail? No, it is the soil that failed. Every time I talk to somebody, and there's a seed guy in the group, it's always that hybrid. No, you just got the wrong hybrid. You got to have my brand. No, it was the soil that failed. In every single instance, every single one of these, it was not the crop. It was the soil. We are not managing our soil. We're managing the crop. We need to let the soil manage the crop. We need to manage the soil. Oh, I got ahead of myself. And sometimes I think it is very much the obvious that we overlook. I like this cartoon. I don't remember where I got it, but sometimes I think we are kind of that way, is that we see something and it is so obvious that we just can't see it. Before I go to my last slide, any questions, comments?
I live a mile and a half from the north edge of the Dray show last summer.
Oh, do you?
And a guy by Rhinebeck has strip tilled and had soil for cover crops for quite a few years. His corn was standing pretty good, but the neighbors around him, it was flat.
You know, and the caveat in there is that at some point, I don't care what you do, Mother Nature can destroy it.
Yeah.
You know, but in all these cases around home, you know, like I say, it was clocked at over 100 miles an hour in some place. Now, was it 100 miles an hour everywhere? No. You know, but yeah, they had soil that was able to hold on to that crop. I went in that one picture. I walked in right along the edge right here. You guys have all tried to pull corn out of the ground this time of year because you're looking for rootworms, right? You pull the corn out to drench the roots. You guys don't do that? Well, anyway, you know how hard it can be. I held my camera with one hand. Maybe I should have brought that. I held my camera with one hand, went into over here, grabbed the corn stalk, and with no effort just pulled it out. Again, it wasn't the crop that failed, it was the soil that failed. There was just mush there. Go back and take you know, the sight, feel, and smell of a soil health indicator. Definitely real slimy. You go into the strip tilled right alongside it, you know. Yes, I could go in there and I could find some patches that were tipped over. Like I say, Mother Nature is in charge. Eventually we'll take everything down, but he's managing his soil's managing his crop. So I mean, yeah, it's a very good point. I was hoping that there would have been some other pictures or something that come out of Iowa showing that, but obviously everything that comes out of there was always the worst case scenario, so it was kind of nice to see this. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to leave it on this. Last month, was it? We were up by Madison. The comment was brought up is what you guys are doing, are you making soil? Are you building soil? What's your thought? Are you? Everybody must be really hungry. I think you're very right. The comment was that there is some pushback says, no, you're not building soil. The soil is what you have. So after leaving that field day last month or whenever it was, I was thinking about that, and maybe think about it this way, is I'm going to use the analogy of a cake. What makes a cake? Well, in simple terms, it's a certain combination, certain ratio of eggs, flour, and water, right? You put that all in the bottom of a pot, you have a cake. Sure you do. It's not going to taste very good. It's not going to hold up your birthday candles, but it is a cake. Now, if you want more cake, if you put more water in the bottom of that pot, do you have more cake? No. You just have a cake that has too much water in it. Now, let's take a look at a soil. What makes up a soil? In general, it's got a mineral component. It's got an organic matter component or an organic component, and it's got a pore space component. And that pore space hopefully has got the right ratio of airspace and water-filled pores. Now, if you take all that and you put in the bottom of a bucket, do you have a soil? Sure. Is it going to grow a crop real well? No. If you drive over it, is it going to support your equipment very well? No. But it is a soil. Now let's go back to the cake. If you give that cake, and you take that cake and you apply just the right conditions to it, maybe you mix it up to the right consistency, you apply the right amount of heat for the right amount of time, now you get something back that's going to taste real good, and it's going to hold up all the candles. You go back to your soil. You take that soil and you give it just the right conditions. You give it soil structure. You give it a good biodiversity of microorganisms. You put some roots in it. You've now got something that's going to filter water. You've got something that's going to grow your plant. You've got something that's going to hold up your equipment. Did you just build a soil? Yes, the answer is yes. And I think you're absolutely right. I think it's the perspective when you're looking at it. I mean, technically, unless you are adding more mineral, more organic matter, more pore space, you're not building a soil. You're not making a soil. But if you're taking something that is very much degraded and you, again, give it the right conditions, just like taking that cake that's just in a mush on the bottom of the pan and make it something that you'd like to eat, and the same thing with that soil. So yes, I'm going to say you're making a soil. So if that conversation comes up again or that comment comes up again, I think that's the conversation that needs to be had, is the context of where you're viewing it. On the way down here, I was thinking another analogy is, I may think I'm a really good cook. My wife probably has a different idea. But, hey, it is all about the perception. And I am going to say, yes, I think in every case, when you're taking something that is degraded, and making it better, yeah, I would be very comfortable saying you're building soil. So that was the last slide I had. Anything further? I wanted to stick around for today and tomorrow, but unfortunately work is really pushing me to get some other things done, so I'm going to have to take off. Appreciate the invite to come down.